Let's take a look at your top 24 overall players, Matthew. And we'll start with 1 through 12.
Yes, let's get into that.
Please,
These are the football players. Football players.
The Olympics is behind us. We're into fantasy somehow.
If you've made it this long, thank you for staying. We really appreciate that. Number 1, Christian McCaffrey. No surprise there. Number 2, CeeDee Lamb. Number 3, Tirico, as this run of wide receivers continues with number 4, Jamar Chase. And number 5, Justin Jefferson. Number 6, last year's ride or die, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We get a little running back duo here with 7 and 8 and Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. Back to the receiver run here with A.J. Brown at 8, Garrett Wilson at 10, Puka Nacua at 11, and we close it out with one more running back with Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 here.
And obviously that'll change if we find out some more information on the hamstring injury. We haven't heard an update yet on a timeline there. So as of now, I'm assuming he's starting the season fine, 100%, but obviously if we get more news there, the Jahmyr Gibbs ranking will change.
I want to start with this.
Sure.
How many of these guys are worthy of being in consideration to be the number 1 overall pick in your draft?
I think the first 5 guys for me. I like, again, and honestly, I think all 5 guys, I think you can make an argument. We talked about Justin Jefferson yesterday. Again, this is a guy who was the consensus number 1 player overall last year. And just, I get it with the quarterback, but this is somebody who averaged over 22 fantasy points per game without Kirk Cousins last year, and and more target competition than he'll have this year. At least for the first half of the season, no KJ Osborne, no TJ Hawkinson. It's literally him and Jordan Addison. And so I think Sam Darnold will be able to get him the ball. Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, all of them, I call them 8s, my guy 8s. All of them obviously have number 1. Listen, we did new material on on the pole vaulting junk guy,
Run back 8s.
Right, so I can I can mix in some classics as well.
Oh,
classics.
Would you consider that a classic?
I'd say The Godfather is a classic. This is more, the Emoji Movie. No offense to the Emoji Movie, I watch a lot at home with my kids.
My daughters love the Emoji Movie.
Very
by the
solid
way,
piece
when
of
it came
cinema.
out. Anyway, and then obviously McCaffrey is a no-brainer. So I think once you start getting into Amon-Ra St. Brown or some of the running backs, that's where I would rather one of those guys. But honestly, if you left your draft with one of those first 5 guys as your number 1 overall pick, I'm fine with it. My rankings are my rankings, but all of them could very easily finish as the number 1 player in fantasy.
Lawrence, could you make an argument for somebody outside that top 5 to be the number 1 overall
Yeah,
pick?
to be honest, I'm going to say Breece Hall. If you're a person who prefers Breece Hall over CMC, we saw what Breece Hall did in the fantasy playoffs last season. He was the top running back in fantasy during the fantasy playoffs, 25 fantasy points per game. Now you upgrade the offensive line, bringing in Tyron Smith. You get Olu on the other side to fill in there. They get Morgan Moses from Baltimore. Elijah Vera Tucker, we hope he's healthy. That's like a complete makeover of what the Jets had on the offensive line. Oh, not to mention you got Aaron Rodgers now and not Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle, who all combined for 11 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. So I think Breece Hall, if there's a guy that's in play to take over that RB1 spot, it's him. And if you have that number 1 overall pick and you're one of the guys that's concerned about, Christian McCaffrey, he 28, he hurt, then Breece Hall would be the way to go, because if you're picking number 1, you're not going to get him on the way back. So if you get him, you got to get him right there.
Can I ask you a question, Connor, real quickly here specifically about Breece Hall? Because you mentioned Tim Boyle, and we have fun at Tim Boyle and Zach Wilson. But one of the benefits of Tim Boyle is that he is the dump-off king.
Yeah.
Right?
Trevor Siemian was too.
Right, and Trevor Siemian was too, and Zach Wilson behind that offensive line, desperately looking.
Right,
and
very
so
true,
do you expect, because Aaron Rodgers traditionally has not been a big dump-off to the running back guy, because he's a guy that can literally just do this and it goes 70 yards. Yep. I mean, he doesn't need to. He has such a quick release and such a strong arm. He never needs to dump off to get out of trouble because he can just sling it. And obviously, given the additions of Mike Williams and Malachi Corley, and we like Tyler Conklin this year, not to mention Garrett Wilson. Do you expect the passing game usage for Breece Hall to be as voluminous this year as it was last season, given Rodgers and the new weapons?
I do, because of this version of Aaron Rodgers that wants to stay healthy, that can't take those hits, that understands how special Breece Hall is. That Rodgers loves the quick game. He just usually loves it to his wide receivers, whether that's a Devontae Adams in the past, Randall Cobb, they were the king of that as well. Yeah. I think the usage of Brees will support the quick game of him in the pass game as well. The one concern I have for Brees is there going to be any touchdown equity taken away with Braylon Allen in this backfield now? I think the Jets love Braylon Allen's running style as that downhill red zone threat, and that could kind of take Brees off the field at the goal line. Sometimes, not a ton, but sometimes. But I think the pass game usage for Brees is the reason you would take him number one.
That would be scary, too. I wonder how many.
That's why I'm asking that, because I think that's the only potential negative mark on Brees Hall.
Braylon Allen is really good. I wonder how many carries he actually figured to get on like a per game basis. If it's 6-7 carries a game, that's important right there, because that wasn't happening last season.
Yeah, I think too that all the focus has been, and not just with Brees Hall, but with Garrett Wilson too, the idea that this is the first time those two guys are playing with a real good NFL quarterback. It's also the first time those guys have had what might be a real solid offensive line, where that hasn't been talked about as much, but bringing in Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, taking Fashanu, like there are pieces on that line where I don't think it's going to be like a top 10 offensive line, but it could be middle of the pack. And they haven't had that at all, where Brees he's been dependent on dump-offs and home run plays on the ground, and he may not need that as much if he's just able to run for 4.8 yards per carry because there are more gaps for him.
Jay, can you make the same argument for a Bijan Robinson that we just made for Brees Hall? Because he sits there at 8 while Brees is 7, and yes, Algier's still there, but Bijan has a capable offensive coordinator that's going to know how to use him this year.
I think I would make the cutoff at those. I think those first 7 guys are kind of in their own. I mean, you could divide them into 2 tiers, but I think there's a drop off to Bijan, because with Bijan, for his value to really skyrocket, you're projecting something that we haven't seen yet. Like, we've seen it from all these other guys. We've seen the value that they've provided, even with Brees, if it hasn't been fully pieced together. With Bijan, like, we need to see that he's not going to be in a timeshare with Tyler Algier. It doesn't seem logical that he would be again, but I think the problem is, and this maybe gets undersold a little bit, like, Tyler Algier is good. Like, it's not, this isn't a situation where, oh, why is A.J. Dillon getting all these carries? No, Tyler Algier is actually good. He's been very effective as a runner, and so I do worry that caps Bijan's ceiling a bit, but at the same time, like, if he's getting 80% of the carries, then he could very well be your number 1 player in fantasy. It's just that we need to see that first.
Yeah, I think that, but I don't think it's outside. I think that's a great point. The one thing I might say here is that if you're hanging your hat on a couple of things, elite talent and also a coaching staff that comes from, Zach Robinson comes from the McVay tree, and Sean McVay has traditionally been a one running back guy. I mean, we talk about the massive usage for Kyron Williams. You think about Todd Gurley back in the day. Like, when there is kind of an elite guy, McVay has just sort of been like, you're my guy. And so we think Bijan's elite. But I agree with you. Like, we haven't seen it yet. You're banking on that potential. So I certainly think within the range of outcomes that we're talking a year from now, hey, wow, Bijan Robinson, number 1 running back in fantasy last year, number 1 player overall. But yes, you were right. We haven't seen it.
I think as well, like, the one guy that we haven't mentioned outside of that top 5, but in the next tier, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think is thought of as maybe like in his own tier, as a tier 2 of receiver, where he's clearly above A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, but probably not thought of with Jefferson, Chase, CD, and Tyreek. I think Amon-Ra is right there with those guys. I think he doesn't get the same buzz as them because, I don't know, he just doesn't have as many like highlight deep balls, acrobat catches. But what I love about Amon-Ra is that, 1, he only has to go outdoors 3 times all season, which is huge for him and for Jared Goff. And then also, I love that he plays in the slot. Playing in the slot just raises your floor. He's just going to get so much more shorter, intermediate stuff. So I think there are absolutely worlds where Amon-Ra is just racking up constantly 9 for 97 and a touchdown and ends up as your wide receiver 1.
I love Amon-Ra St. Brown, as you know. My ride or die made me look really smart last year. The only knock, and it's a very slight knock on Amon-Ra St. Brown, is that I think he's probably more of a floor play than upside play, in the sense that it's hard to see him getting an insane amount of touchdowns, given the emergence of Sam Laporta, given the way that they like to run their offense. When they get in close, they like to pound it with Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, right? And so I think, if you're asking me who leads the league in receptions, who leads the league in receiving yards, Amon-Ra is certainly, I don't know what his odds are, Jay, off the top of my head, but I would think he's got to be one of the favorites to do that. It wouldn't surprise me if he leads in both categories, but I think just in terms of touchdowns, assuming health for Jefferson, Chase, Hill, and Lamb, just you feel like he probably doesn't get as many touchdown opportunities as some of those other guys. That's the only thing. Like, I think there's a scenario where CeeDee Lamb has 14 touchdowns, right? I mean, there's a scenario where Tirico, Just hard to see Amon-Ra St. Brown getting to double-digit touchdowns.
The way I would look at it is, if I had to bet my life on a guy to finish as a top 7 wide receiver, I would be betting on Amon-Ra and CD Lamb. Those would be my 2 guys. If I was betting on someone to be the wide receiver 1, I'd be betting on Tirico and Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, that's my point.
Okay.
Right?
That's
Again,
the combo I want to have.
Yeah,
We
right.
sifted through the Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, and obviously CMC. How you sift through the hero running backs. But there's this giant cluster, right, from 2 to 5 that you saw there with CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. Amon-Ra could be in that conversation as well. Lawrence, you're drafting. How do you sift through it? Because it feels like you could take any of those guys from 2 to 6, and no one's going to look at you and go, that was a mistake, that was a bad pick. It's all just preference and projection.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. Like what Matthew said, the odds of this receiver getting this and that. Like, if you think 1,800 yards, 1,900-yard wide receivers, we're thinking about Justin Jefferson's, the Tyreek Hills, and the CeeDee Lambs, right? But Amon-Ra St. Brown, 1,500 yards, that ain't so bad, and we talk about, CeeDee Lamb, he had his 181 targets and 135 receptions. Well, Amon-Ra St. Brown with the Sam Laporta, with the Gibbs and Montgomery, still saw 164 targets in his own 119 catches. So, he's not far off of that. So the gap has certainly closed. It's just that when you think about the big playability, the big score, like you said, he's more of a floor play. He's going to give you that 9 for 97 and a touchdown. But will he ever give you that 5 for 204 like a Tyreek? Probably not. But he's consistent enough to where he's at least closed that gap.
I've said this before. And by the way, Amon-Ra St. Brown actually had 10 touchdowns last year, so he did get to double digits. But feels like that's more of a ceiling than, it doesn't feel like, again, like if you tell me one of these 5 receivers has 15 touchdowns this year, you feel like Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably lowest odds on the list between, Lamb, Chase, Hill, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra.
I mean, you have Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson over Amon-Ra. I have Amon-Ra over Jamar Chase.
Interesting.
Not Justin Jefferson, but I have Amon-Ra.
Why do you hate Jamar Chase? Proud Fantasy Life investor. Why do you hate Jamar Chase?
He's
Lawrence?
a Fantasy Life investor?
He is indeed.
All right, so I like him now, but not more than Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just because of the targets, the run after the catch ability, he's always getting that ball and running over the middle. So it's like he's good in that way, and he'll continue to be.
Well, no.
I think he'll have more targets and receptions than Jamar Chase this season, but probably not more yards, if that makes sense.
It certainly does, because again, Jamar Chase is screaming down the sideline, and Amon-Ra's, most of his stuff is line of scrimmage, or 8-10 yard outs, out of the slot. One of the things I always say is that you can't win your league in the first round, you can lose it, right? And so again, first round is about, you want some upside obviously, but mostly what you want is safe. You want, your first round pick. I've done this, and my draft day manifesto is coming out tomorrow actually, but we've looked at it over the years, but basically about 30% of your team's total production comes from your first 2 picks. Now again, there's always the CJ Stroud outliers, the Tank Dells. You're always going to have guys, but generally speaking, about 30%. If you really want to nail your first round picks, it just makes your life that much harder if you don't get production from your first round picks. And so Amon-Ra, there's just a massive floor there again, and we talked about the fact only 3 outdoor games the entire season. We know how good Jared Goff is indoors. So I have Jamar Chase over Amon-Ra St. Brown, but jokes aside, I don't hate it. Obviously, I love the Sun God.
Yeah. And at the top of this group is CeeDee Lamb, Jay, who, you obviously...
I call him Mates. Yeah.
You call him Mates. Only his friends
I
do
call
that.
him CeeDee Lamb.
I call him CeeDee Lamb.
Well, we're friends. CeeDee Lamb and I are friends.
More acquaintances, me and CeeDee.
Yeah.
Not a texting relationship like me and Puka.
Yeah.
The expected target share just differentiates him from this pack, even the contract issues aside right now. He's in an offense where it's CeeDee Lamb all day, every day, and you can't always say that about everybody else on this list.
And I want to ask you a question, too, while you're talking about CeeDee Lamb. What's the date? We're sitting here, it's August 14th. What's the date where you start going, oh, God, if CeeDee Lamb hasn't reported to camp? Right now, if you do a draft tonight, I think you're still taking CeeDee Lamb, one of the first 3 picks. But at what date in August or September are you like, okay, this is going south.
I think once we get to like 10, 12 days before the season, if he hasn't inked yet, then you start to really, I think, downgrade him. Because the issue is that like these guys are so close, these top 5 receivers, that if there is a contractual factor, there's a chance he might not play week 1. That's enough to just bump him to being 6th in this group, or being 5th in this group. So I think that's the downside with CD. We expect that he's going to get out there. I think the reporting has been largely fairly confident that he is going to be out there. And if he is, I mean, led the NFL in targets and receptions last year. And what you love about CD is, 1, to your point, Connor, the lack of competition. 2, he gets to play in the dome. He's not exposed to the conditions like Jamar Chase is. He also doesn't have to play the defenses of the AFC North 6 times like Jamar Chase does, every time outdoors. And then of these guys, I think that he has, outside of Joe Burrow, I think he has the best quarterback. Dak Prescott finished 2nd in MVP last year. Dak Prescott in a dome is a monster, and CD Lamb got better as the year went on, which some of these guys have fallen off. He's still young as well, so he's just kind of, I think, the most rounded candidate when you consider everything, and he may not be the absolute best in every area, but I think that he is perhaps the safest bet on the board.
Let's look at the back end of this group, guys. That tier where it starts with A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, if you just want a running back, Lawrence, you're going to take Gibbs. How do you argue for that over those receivers that probably feel more like comfort picks, but we know the upside of Gibbs?
Yeah, well, Jay said it earlier about Bijan. Like, we'd have to see something to, put him towards that top running back. Well, we've seen that Jahmyr Gibbs is capable of getting those 80 to 90 receptions, and now they've already said in the offseason he's going to take a bigger workload coming into this season. So me personally, the way I'm feeling, if I'm drafting on that back end, not only am I taking Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm taking a couple other running backs probably over Puka. I like Garrett Wilson a lot. Like I have him at wide receiver 7 this season, but Jahmyr Gibbs, knowing that he's going to touch near 70, 80 receptions, it's not hard to argue that for him.
Guys, what do you think of that? Could you get behind that strategy, Jay, of taking a Gibbs, over some of those receivers on the back? And especially when you look at A.J. Brown, who had a career high in receptions last year, and Garrett Wilson, where the projections just feel so much better this year, not just because of Aaron Rodgers, but a viable backup on the team in Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, I think A.J. Brown's a really fascinating one. I would say that of the top 12 guys here, he would be the one who has had the least fantasy content about him in the offseason. Like, he's just A.J. Brown. He's so rock solid. And we think about him as a really high floor player because, is this going into year 3 in Philadelphia? He's got the quarterback in Jalen Hurts. We've seen it over and over again. We know what the offense is likely going to look like. At the same time, like, A.J. Brown had huge peaks and valleys last year. A.J. Brown, 11 weeks into the season, was being talked about as an MVP candidate, and then he ended the season doing not that much. So I think that Hurts is going to be better through the air, or at least more consistent this year, and A.J. Brown is going to produce. He is high floor. He dealt with injury issues earlier in his career, but they seem to have gone away. So I think that he is... I would take him over Garrett Wilson and Puka because I think there's more uncertainty, one with just Aaron Rodgers and what he's going to look like. And then Puka, I don't think I'm going to end up with my man Puka Nacua in any draft because I'm so high on Cooper Kupp relative to Puka. And then Jahmyr Gibbs.
Connor, I need a ruling here. If he's not going to have Puka Nacua on
Can't
any
profile
team,
pick.
Can't be a profile pick. Or
that's how I stay close to Puka without him being on my team.
Or should he at least change the profile pick to be unedited, where it was all 4 of us?
You got to change
to
it to
Puka?
Cooper Kupp. You got a picture with Cooper Kupp.
I don't have any pictures of Cooper Kupp. I also don't recall you guys being in the interview with Puka Nacua. I think that was a solo job.
We could show it to you.
Maybe
we could actually run it back.
The
for
YouTube
you.
link exists.
Yeah, the YouTube link we have.
I have
clips
solid
of it.
pictures of me and Baker Mayfield and Saquon Barkley as well, so I've got a recurring cast that I can go through. Whatever I need.
Hey, producer Steven, I want to note this right now. This year when we're on Radio Row at the Super Bowl, Jay is so far away where we sit. I want Jay at his own table. I want Jay, like, me and Connor and Lawrence are going to be on one table with whoever the athlete is, and then Jay is going to be like at the kids' table, separated.
Like a headset.
Like a headset.
We have to throw a different camera to
Correct.
hit. Yeah,
100%. And what I want is I don't want him to have as good a camera. I want when you pan over to Jay, it's just him like doing this. He's like on an iPhone. So he's like on FaceTime while the rest of us are, on
production.
real NBC cameras.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Be so far away in New Orleans, interviewing like Pelicans players instead of
Yeah,
NFL
1,000%.
people.
Is that- Now, hey, let's go out to our man on the street interviewing a beignet, Jay Croucher. That's
I
what's
thought you
going
were
to
try and
happen.
name a Pelicans player.
Right, exactly.
man.
What's the action like at Cafe Du Monde, Jay Croucher? That's the kind of stuff we're going to say.
I'll
Yeah.
still find a way to get a solo photo of me and CD Lamb.
Exactly.
Street reporter Jay Raymond
yeah.
Croucher.
Yeah, Jay Croucher is learning all about voodoo down on the street. Let's go to him now.
Before we get off of these top 12 and New Orleans, Connor, putting you on the spot here, just with Bijan Robinson, because I think he's kind of the most compelling guy in the top 12 because the range of outcomes is so high.
Yep.
If you had to set an over-under, what would you set in terms of percentage of of Atlanta's carries, Bijan versus Tyler Algier? Is like the expectation 65-35, 60-40, 70-30? Because that is going to shape about how dominant a fantasy player he is.
Well, I think I would factor in touches 70-30
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's the difference, right? Carries I'd be afraid of because Algier is a good runner. He's a good goal line runner.
That's the problem. If it's like 50-50 in
I was about
carries,
to
then
say,
how can
I was going to say 60-40 on the carries, but
completely
70-30 on the touches.
Right.
That's
the
what we hope.
difference.
That's what we hope.
And by the way, I bet I would say 90-10 on the high value touches, like the red zone, green zone, goal to go.
Which was a problem last year.
Right, which is a problem. But I just like Raheem Morris is just like, the last guy didn't use Bijan Robinson, and he no longer has a job.
right.
I mean, so
one of the
Raheem
first
Morris
things
is
he
gonna be like,
said.
he's gonna be like, listen, Zach, use Bijan.
Right.
Like, and then I'll say, and he's literally said that. He's literally come out and said, he said that in a very polite way, but in essence, basically saying like, well, the last guy didn't really use Bijan that right, and he's not here. So, Raheem wants to keep his job.
If Bijan get 20 touches a game, that's still room for Tyler Algier to do his thing, and that's definitely enough for Bijan Robinson to do his.
Honestly, if you told me you guaranteed 17 touches for Bijan Robinson, I'm in.
Yeah.
17 like Jamal Charles didn't need more than 17 touches a game to be like
efficiency with the touches.
He's going to be super efficient because he's got big playability. Again, high volume. He's going to be more involved in the passing game. Not high value touches, I guess is a better way to say it. Okay, you have a chance to win $1 million in the NBC Sweepstakes on Yahoo Fantasy. Just download the redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app or go to NBCSports.com/fantasymillion for additional details. What are you waiting for? Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotorWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.